Hey, Ryan, when is Belko Experiment releasing?
Well, Bekah, that would be March 17th.
All right.
This Shockwaves episode is brought to you by the Belko Experiment. In a twisted social experiment, a group of 80 Americans are locked in their high-rise corporate office in Bogota, Colombia, and ordered by an unknown voice coming from the company's intercom system to participate in a deadly game of kill or be killed. Written by the acclaimed writer-director James Gunn, Guardians of the Galaxy, and directed by Greg McLean, known for The Darkness and Wolf Creek, the Belko Experiment is a terrifying, provocative, and at times hilarious thrill ride that provokes the question, what does it take to survive at work?
Yeah, it looks badass.
That one comes out March 17th, folks.
Nice.
On my calendar, man.
It's awesome.
And I noticed a lot of people are asking on social media, is it coming out in theaters and VOD? Incorrect. No, it is coming out in theaters only on March 17th. It's and check your local listings because it's a somewhat wide release.
Yeah.
So
it's really fun.
Yeah.
I wish I had seen that one in the theater.
About a year ago, I was seeing it in the Blumhouse screening room and going, oh my God, there's so much blood and gore. I love it.
Yeah, I watched it in this room by myself.
Selling it. All right, well, I can't wait
It's great.
to see it.
Well, welcome listeners.
Yeah, this is Shockwaves episode number 42.
42.
Here we are at 42. I'm one of your hosts, Rob G. Sitting with me, Mr. Ryan Turek.
Hello.
Rebekah McKendry.
What up?
And Mr. Elric Kane.
Hi.
And, no energy.
Get back in the corner, Elric.
Let's talk about what you're drinking.
What we're drinking.
What's
First
fueling
off,
this show?
Sarah Blackburn, you are a hero and a champion because you, I'm just going to read this letter. Sarah Blackburn actually sent a 6-pack of beer. And she said, hey there, Shockers. As both a horror fan and a craft beer enthusiast, the beer you mentioned drinking while you're podcasting makes me feel sad. Don't drink sad beer with good horror. Here's a 6-pack and a big one to share. Much love, Sarah Blackburn, listener. Boom. I love this because I am currently drinking the big one.
You're currently not sharing the big one.
I'm not sharing the big one. It's Campfire Stout, and it tastes like s'mores in my mouth.
S'mores in my mouth.
I'm drinking Eintach with white ale, which tastes like a Viking in my mouth. Take that however you want.
I'm imagining a Skarsgård.
Oh, good God, you guys.
The older Stellan variety. Aged well.
Anyways, thank you very much, Sarah. Sarah is a frequent contributor on our Shockwaves Movie Club Facebook page. And listeners, we love you. We got a lot of listener
Thanks so
love
much,
this week,
Sarah.
guys.
Yeah,
If you haven't found that club, you really should because it is a really great way to interact. It's been super fun for us.
I can't even keep up with it. There's so much activity on it. Like, I'll check it every couple of hours and like 8 new things go up and I can barely keep up. It's awesome.
And if you're in the club, understand that it's also inspired by a podcast. Because I noticed every once in a while someone's like, what's Shockwaves? And it's like,
who's Rob? Who's Bekah?
That's funny. I haven't seen those. That's
I've
really
seen that come
I've
up.
seen a few, and they're like, who are you? I don't want to debate with you.
BJ kicked them out now.
All right, well, we got a hell of a show for you, but obviously...
We have a hell of a show.
Hell of a show.
Yeah.
One of the
Oh my
greats,
gosh.
I'd say.
One
We're
of the
working
greats
in
for
reverse
sure.
tonight, so the interview, it's epic.
Yeah.
It's coming up.
Coming up is going to be quite something that all of us have been looking forward to. Right. So, a lot of movies seen this week. I'll kick us off. Coming out next Friday, the 17th, the same day as Belko, is The Devil's Candy, which is written and directed by Sean Byrne. This is the guy that brought us The Loved Ones.
Yep.
And this was great. The Cine Family here in Los Angeles did a special advanced screening a couple of nights ago. My good friend Rob Flender, who's been on the show before and who's a huge horror fan, invited me to join him. And I was like, cool. And I had not, I may have seen the trailer, but I really didn't have a grasp on what this movie was about at all. So I went in pretty blindly. And I love The Loved Ones. I think it's a great, great little movie. I equally loved this movie. I actually think it's better than The Loved Ones. It like 2 films in, or at least 2 horror films. I don't know if he did anything before Loved Ones, but what a strong, confident voice in the genre. And basically, and the other thing is the acting across the board. Like Ethan Embry is the lead in this. He's somewhat unrecognizable because he's got the long hair and all these tattoos and is kind of like a rocker. I thought he was terrific, and the girl that played his wife and his daughter, exceptional. So across the board,
Taylor
amazing
Pruitt
actors.
Vince.
What's that?
Taylor Pruitt Vince.
Oh, yeah.
Who's the not the
He's in
Kind of
Identity.
the, yeah. Kind of the He's kind of the antagonist. Yeah. But
I got the name wrong. Never mind.
But basically, they are a family that get a really good deal on a house. They Ethan Embry's character is kind of a struggling artist. And there's also the metal theme in it. Like, him and his daughter love metal, so they're always listening to it. And the wife's like, can you turn this down a little bit? And they're like, no, it's metal. So it's kind of fun. And I always wonder how expensive was Metallica and Slayer songs for this? But it's all in there. And basically, they get a really good deal on a house, which is like too good to be true. Something terrible happened at the house. You know that cliche. But really where it goes was all surprising directions. I was so
smart characters,
great family dynamic. I mean, as a father, I think you're really good. That relationship between him and the daughter is like great. The backbone of the whole movie. And that's what I love.
As a rock star, I'm sure I'll appreciate it.
Elric's wearing his leather pants
Viking
today.
in your mouth is going to your head.
Unbelievable.
Now, did it have the same kind of humor that the Loved Ones have? Because the Loved Ones, I've rewatched it recently. It's not funny, but the way that he shoots it, it's shot like a comedy.
Black comedy.
Yeah, there's comedy in the shooting style.
That was in there because, I mean, it's really dark material. Like, the horror element of it is really gnarly. But yes, we did get a few moments. And again, it comes from those honest family dynamic character moments that people would laugh at certain things. And really satisfying. I think it's limited theatrical and VOD. If you can see it with a group of friends, that's the way I recommend it, because literally the finale was just so satisfactory with a group of people cheering it on.
I asked you on the phone this. I'm just opening it up to Ryan too, but I remember this played like almost 2 years ago at South by as well. But that's a long time from there to finally coming out. Do you know any reason why it was delayed?
No.
Okay.
No.
I don't. I'd mentioned to you that they did a Q&A. Ethan Embry was there, and Keith Calder, who produced it from Snoot Films. And basically, they just said, Sean is one of these perfectionists. Like, that's why... even when Ethan was apparently attached for years. Like, after he got attached, he rewrote the script for a year. Like, it wasn't 100.
So maybe he re-edited post that.
Maybe he tweaked it more. But really, I think it was the way it's put together, executed, directed, acted, everything about it. I thought was spectacular. And I can already say this early out, it will be one of my top films of the year.
The same thing happened with The Loved Ones, where it took forever to get released. Like, I remembered seeing copies of it at Fangoria, like, seriously, a year before it came out.
Well, it never really got initially didn't get a release here.
Yeah, it got a DVD release eventually. But
a nice little story that I reminded Bekah last week. That was the first film we ever watched together, besides Possession. Because I came to her house. This is like 5-6 years ago now.
Yeah, it's when I lived in the shitty apartment in Hollywood.
I had an Australian copy.
Yeah, because it hadn't come out here
yeah.
yet, and he came over and showed it.
Yeah, and we all liked it. It's a good movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually think Devil's Candy is it's definitely the superior film of the two.
Okay.
I've never been a fan of Loved Ones, but
wow.
I thought it's just not my cup of tea. But I thought with Devil's Candy, it was definitely a terrific evolution of his craft and characters I actually liked.
Yeah,
I like these characters.
I like everybody.
Do we know if he's in town at all, or is he?
I checked in during this week, and I said, "Are you going to come into town for some promo?" He goes, "Sadly not, but I will definitely hit you guys up as soon as I'm back." So.
He'd be great. He'd be great. But yeah, strongest recommendation. That one's out next Friday, so everyone should make an effort to check it out. Ryan, what about you?
Where do I start? Do I start with? Let's start with the familiar.
Okay.
They showed Fright Night at the New Bev on Saturday night.
Midnight screening.
Me being a diehard Fright Night fan, I had to go see it on the big screen again. Beautiful print, great movie, amazing crowd. And it's every time I see the film, it's just an affirmation that it's my favorite horror film of all time.
Nice.
And I don't know if I told this Fright Night story here on Shockwaves. I know I talked about it on the Bloodcast. But it's got a weird history because I remember my dad took me on opening night. It came out in August of '85. It was one of those kind of father-son bonding nights was like, hey, let's just go see a horror movie. But my grandmother tagged along, and we all piled into a car, and we all started driving to, I forgot, North Haven or somewhere. And, you know, my town was very small. Wherever you get dropped off, you can always walk back home. So my dad passed through the middle of town, pulled over it, and I was like, what's going on? And he goes, you can get out if you want to, because it's going to be scary. And I was like, no. And he's like, no. I don't want you crying and getting all upset because it's scary. And I was like, no, I am going to do this.
Your dad was trying to road ditch you.
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
my God.
No, he was like, you can walk home. He goes, you just straight up walk home. And my grandmother's like, what are you doing? And he's like, no. Let's see what he's got. And I was like, nope, I'm going to do this. And I went into the film. And I sat down and I watched it and I loved it. I loved it so much. The movie is just total perfection to me. You know, if you guys haven't seen Fright Night, I mean, like, what the fuck are you doing? Because it's the ultimate story about a teenage boy taking on the vampire next door. But it's also about the ultimate story about a teenage boy, like, trying to save his girlfriend from doing it with like a man, like a grown man, you know, like he comes muscling in on their relationship. And she's like, oh, here's a man who's not going to force himself on me like Charlie does. Here's a guy who's got charm. Here's a guy who's got class. And Charlie's like, no. So the movie is like really about Charlie fucking, you know, getting his shit together, respecting the female. Manning up, you know.
Even when that female's Amanda Burse.
Hey, you know what? She's really good in it. Everybody's great. Just everything about this film is just so amazing. You know, the way the structure of the story, it's constantly moving, it's constantly escalating. And like the soundtrack is like basically imprinted on my soul. Every single time I hear that Fright Night theme, I get chills. Like there's something that it fucking rewired me when I saw it as a kid.
Texas Frightmare better have this guy hosting that panel.
You know what?
That's right. Yeah.
Because I will be disgusted if he's not on that panel.
I've seen a couple people who have requested that I do the hosting, but I mean, like, I don't know what I got to do.
The story about your dad is exactly like the story I have about my mom bringing home the VHS of Fright Night Part 2. And it might even be more touching. Just let me start.
By the way, I was approached by someone at a signing recently, and they were like, when you and Elric hugged it out about Fright Night 2, like, I was like, that's why I listen to this podcast.
That's so funny.
That's amazing.
Excellent.
That's really funny.
But yeah, Fright Night's always been part of my DNA. And it was funny because I was thinking recently about my dad. I used to build model kits when I was a kid. And my dad bought like this Fright Night model kit by this company called Geometric Designs. And I think it was maybe it's just a kind of a weird father-son bonding thing, and you know, me having respect for my dad. But he painted that motherfucker like a professional special effects artist. Like when he put it all together, I was like, holy crap. And I called when I got home this weekend and I was like, you still got that thing? Because I want it like on a shelf now.
Yeah.
You know, I have something else of his on a shelf, but he did such an amazing job with it.
Well, because he wasn't just your dad. He was, and you're one of the only people I know in this situation. He was your dad, but he was also a genuine horror fan.
Right.
And I love that about him. Every time I hear stories about him. It's great.
So anyways, I saw Fright Night at the New Bev, like for like the 50th time, you know.
Awesome.
Bekah.
I rewatched She Creature from 2001. And have you guys not seen this? Mm-hmm. Okay, you need
I'm thinking
to see
and they remade it.
There was a Corman one,
Yeah,
wasn't
this is okay. So it wasn't
Early
Corman;
one.
it was Sam Arkoff.
Sam
AIP made one in 1955, 56 was the original. And so what happened was in the 2000s, early 2000s, Cinemax was working with Samsung Liu and said, we want to make a slate of films that are based off the old AIP titles. We're going to use the titles, but we want different scripts and different concepts and new directors in, and we're going to completely remake them. So we're using the titles, but they have nothing to do with the original films. And the ones that they picked, I do not know, because AIP had some great titles. I do not know why they went with these. They did like Teenage Caveman and Earth versus the Spider. And most of the majority of the slate of 5 are kind of forgettable and tedious and campy, except for She Creature. And She Creature was made by, hold on, I wrote down the director's name because I'm going to forget it. Sebastian.
Gutierrez.
Yes. Yeah. Who later went on to write like Snakes on a Plane. He wrote Gothica, and he definitely was more known as a scriptwriter. But what he made She Creature into is amazing. It is this classy monster film. It's about carnies from the 1900s, this like traveling group of Irish carnies who happen upon a real mermaid and decide that they're going to take her to the United States and tour her so that they can make money off of it. So they throw her in a tank and then hop on a ship bound for the United States. But they're having problems containing the mermaid. She's telepathic and control the men. So both like ship's crew and the carnies start dying. But the whole thing, it's really moody. It uses source lighting the whole time. So it's all these lanterns and it feels really claustrophobic but warm. And there's only two women pretty much in the movie, the mermaid and then the main carnie's wife. And they kind of connect, and it's got like this weird female empowerment feel to it as well. And I've always loved this film. One of the first articles I wrote for the site when we started up Blumhouse.com was a love letter to this movie. And so I hadn't watched it in years, so I rewatched it this week, and it's still awesome.
That whole slate has been on my mind because it came out, it was a Showtime thing.
Yeah. Well, it was Cinemax.
Or Cinemax. Yeah.
And they had like grandiose plans for it where they were going to give it to HBO to then screen, and they were hoping to go theatrical. But then it was right around the time that a couple of different anthology shows had failed on Fox, like back to back, like Night Visions failed, and there was another one. And so then they were like, okay, well, it's not the time for anthologies, and they bagged the whole thing. But there were much better titles they could have started with.
Well, and also it's worth noting that Larry Clark contributed to this and did Teenage Caveman. Which
dude, that's one of the most unwatchable movies ever. And I like Larry Clark a lot. I remember being so excited. Oh, a new Larry Clark movie, and I hear it's
part of this
and it was unwatchable. Like it was so nothing.
All I remember is a sex scene that just goes way out of control, and I was like, what?
So the majority of this slate are just kind of weird and tedious and awkward and clunky, and then there's She Creature, which is really sophisticated and classy and beautiful. So I highly recommend hunting it down. The ultimate She Creature at the end, because it's amazing, was done by Stan Winston.
Yep.
Okay.
And so it's gorgeous.
Gets my attention.
And they sold toys. They sold the toys at Toys R Us.
Wow.
Like they sold a line of these movies. So there was Teenage Caveman at Toys R Us. There was the She Creature at Toys R Us.
I wish I'd had the She Creature toy.
Ludicrous.
Yeah.
Really
all I remember is Mike walking in and seeing Mike Mendes with all of them. And he's like, oh, look, I got toys.
Of course.
And creating the greatest transition of all, Don't Kill It. Hey, huzzah!
This is unscripted podcasting, folks.
I watched director Mike Mendes' Don't Kill It, which I was meant to go to because everyone was going to it, but I had to stay home. I watched it on VOD by myself. This looks like the kind of movie that would be a lot of fun in a big group of people. I'll tell you what, if I was making my top 10 movies of 15-year-old Elric, this is number one of that year. Because this is like, and I mean that as an absolute compliment to Mike, because Mike knows my taste in movies. The first 10 or 15 minutes of this movie, the middle 10 minutes, and the end 10 minutes of this movie have so much fucking carnage, and it is so much fun in those moments because it feels like Mike Mendes cut, like just everything he's ever wanted to just throw in an action carnage sequence.
Yes.
Other things about this movie that surprised me is Dolph Lundgren from start to end was really solid. Like he's just like, I was surprised he could give that kind of there's no weak point of Dolph Lundgren suddenly going, oh God, look how bad he is. You have to kind of make it up.
Like exercise video Dolph Lundgren?
Yeah, I don't know about,
we haven't done that joke yet. That joke's coming.
Bekah could see the future.
The concept of this movie, and because I really like Big Ass Spider. That was a movie that surprised me where I had like no expectations. I was like, this is really fun. I feel similarly about this, especially in the sequences where he gets to go to town. Has basically the idea is, this demon box has kind of been opened, and when one person has this, is possessed by this demon, it will kill the next person and the next person. But if you kill it, you become the demon. And I've never seen that. So it's a fun reversal. It's kind of going in a post-prophecy world where everyone kind of demons with black eyes. That's the only critique I'd have is like the black eye thing's a little, and shrieking is a little, been done a million times. But when Mike gets a sequence in this, and this is obviously we're friends of this person, so it's take it for a grain of salt. But when he gets a sequence to kind of go to town, I was blown away by just how crazy it got.
Right.
Like it would go crazy, and there'd be like bodies being split in two and exploding heads, and you're like, holy, at the most like inappropriate moments. And the only negative I say about the film as a whole, and I don't think Mike wrote it, is it's just it's one of those movies that will then have long exposition periods.
Yeah,
a lot of backstory.
It's the movie. I saw it at Fantastic Fest, and it played amazingly. And
it's a great midnight movie.
Yeah, it's a great midnight movie. It's just the momentum of it.
Exactly.
When the crackling energy and the momentum of it. But you're absolutely right. Once it starts to slow down for like expository.
Well, there's a big scene where they have to tell the whole demon. But I will say that I think this is why I know Dolph was so good in it, in that sequence. And Mike, as a director, is they're finding something to at least make it fun. Because you have to, it's almost like, oh shit, we have to get through 10 pages here. And I think Dolph making really weird choices and just still being engaging, even though the material is just, explaining story. And I think that tells me a lot about who's making this. But, he's never really had a huge budget to a movie. And I think he makes a lot with what he's got. I've got to say, for me, of the recent movies he's made, I think it's probably the one I found most entertaining, just had a lot of fun with. And
yeah, you can't go wrong with 3 massacres.
Really big massacres. These things are carnage.
I have this sitting on my desktop. I cannot wait to watch this movie now.
I'd be shocked if you didn't love it. Because it's just, he really, and I'm not saying that as a friend and a listener of our show.
Hi,
and
Mike.
a guest. We're stacking the deck. It's always, you're always happy to see when somebody gets their voice across. And I could tell in those moments that he got across what he's, can do with the movie.
What's good, what he's
which
good
is
at,
super fun.
Yeah. For me, I picked up the King Kong the original 1933 Blu-ray because they just re-released it with a new cover, and it's like $8 on Amazon, and I figured, there's probably a great documentary and all on there, and Kong Skull Island is coming out soon, so I was like, oh yeah, I'd love to revisit the original. Now, I grew up a child of the 76 one. That's the one I always remember and loved. Jessica Lange, it looks amazing in that, and I love all the production stories now about how they built a giant 40-foot robot Kong that didn't work at all. So it's just Rick Baker, uncredited in a gorilla costume.
Yeah. That's De Laurentiis, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. But what I realized is I have never seen the 1933 King Kong from start to finish ever. I've always caught it on TV as a kid and watched bits and pieces of it. But I started it, and immediately the Blu-ray starts with a 5-minute overture. So I was like, oh man, I don't know this. That's cool. And it's it's great. It's amazing when you contextualize that this was the 30s. That period of film. And they're basically, once they get to the island, and there's all these freaking different variations of dinosaurs and monsters, and obviously, now it's somewhat, I don't want to say laughable, but obviously there's the stop motion to the average movie viewer will be like, oh, that looks stupid or whatever, but there's just a charm to it, in the same way that the original Clash of the Titans, I will never not love that movie because as a kid, I always remember the Medusa scene and there's just a magic to that stop motion. So the original King Kong still has a charm to it. I'd like to revisit the other versions throughout the years because I like Peter Jackson's, but not
it's bloated
that much.
It's too long. That's too long.
And in fact, I bought the Blu-ray of that one for $5, and I looked at the director's cut. It's 4 hours
it's
long.
So indulgent.
God.
It's so indulgent.
So you think to yourself, I don't know if I want a 4-hour version of this. But
look, the whole Kong on the ice.
Yeah.
That whole sequence is beautiful. That is all
That's
beautiful.
A great addition.
But then you have the flip side of that, and it's the Brontosaurus chase, and you're like, oh my God, stop wanking, please,
In the original, I always liked, because when I watched it as a kid, I was like, oh, look, Kong has hair, and the hair moves around. Years later, I was watching a documentary on stop motion, specifically on Ray Harryhausen. It was talking about how those were actually Willis O'Brien's fingerprints because they discovered that they couldn't touch the clay that they used, that the armature, they put the clay over top, and then they couldn't touch it to move it without leaving a fingerprint. So they used it as Kong's hair. So that's actually his fingerprint there.
That's awesome.
I thought it was amazing.
Well, hopefully next week we'll talk about Kong.
Yeah, I definitely want to see it.
Good things.
Wait, is that the same weekend as Belko and everything?
No. Kong comes out
this Friday.
today.
Today. It's out now.
Oh, sweet.
As of this episode. And the last thing I want to say about it, because I kind of want to open this up to the group on our Facebook group, or the discussion, because I was telling Bekah, and hopefully by the time you hear this episode, I will have finished this article. But this movie made me obsessed with the secondary character deaths that have absolutely nothing to do with the main narrative. And the reason being is because there's a moment in the original King Kong where he's climbing the goddamn Empire State Building. And literally, he peeks in and sees a girl sleeping in bed, and he reaches in, grabs her, pulls her out, looks at her, realizes it's not Fay Ray, and just tosses her over, and she's dead.
Animal instinct, man.
But I watched this whole scene, and I was like, "What's her story?" Rent's expensive in New York City. She probably had a tough time. You're sleeping.
She's been at work all day,
fast asleep. Imagine getting woken up to a giant monkey hand that pulls you out of your apartment.
That's horror.
And throws you, and you're like, this is how I'm going to die. I can't
I
believe
want
it.
you guys to look up that actress's name and hashtag her at us this week.
Yeah.
We're going to make her live again.
She has no name, but who knows who it is. But
Wow.
but I'm obsessed with that, and there's lots of characters like that in movies. Just the random has nothing to do with the plot death.
Yeah.
In Star Trek,
They're
they
like-
call them red shirts.
The red shirts.
Exactly,
Yeah. Ryan?
So I spent a few hours on Saturday going through Vinegar Syndrome's
Hey.
Blu-ray of Slaughterhouse.
Oh man.
Oh, man.
Me and
Don't you
Elric.
give me that, oh man.
What?
That's a
We
rough
could give
one,
you our
dude.
sympathies.
That ain't a rough one.
There's no
that's-
way that you like this.
As
Get out of here.
as Sam Zimmerman and I talked
Ryan.
about on G-Chat, it's an acquired taste, guys.
Yeah,
It's an
well,
acquired
that-
taste.
Not a good taste.
Oh man, come on!
What did we
Buddy
watch
is
this
so
with?
much fun. When did
You
you
guys
guys
did
watch
a
this?
double feature.
We
this, I
double
remember.
featured it with Axe, didn't we?
No, we double featured it with the Tarantino
Cutthroat
Cutthroat
Nine?
Sign.
Yeah.
Which
Which
is
was
good
the better
movie.
movie.
I like
Listen,
Cutthroat's Nine.
I think it's got its charms. I think look, there have been worse offenses in slasher cinema. And the fact that they actually embedded some sort of like actual story. It's like, which they wound up like kind of ripping off from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, obviously, and blah, blah, blah. But come on, guys, Buddy Bacon.
Well,
Buddy, don't you
hold
like
on.
Buddy?
Here's what I remember. The guy, well, first of all, the guy's gross, especially in high def.
Yeah, he's hard to watch in high def.
He is gross. There's like snot.
You're telling me
No,
that.
I mean, his Tinder profile
We're
is
just
so rough.
starting.
Okay, Brennan, our website assistant, is like die-hard slasher fan, like more than
Have you
anyone
seen
else
it?
I know. Do you like it?
Slaughterhouse?
I missed that one.
Oh no!
Well, it's,
Okay.
it's only really
next
just
next
getting.
time. Yeah.
There's,
so-
I mean, like, here's the thing. It's got its charms. It's got its fun. The only look, it's not a good film, but in terms of slasher cinema, it's perfectly watchable, and I enjoyed it. But I did have one kind of like grievance against it, which is its fucking title sequence. Like I was like watching it, kind of chilling out, and then all of a sudden they get into this like wholesale like, we're going to show you what happens to a pig from
that's right.
the fact that it's in a pen to
Yeah.
just being dumped and like its insides being torn out and all that stuff. And I was like, all right,
There's
I'm an animal lover, but
that one
I
sequence with
remember.
the kids with the flashlights and the
yeah,
masks.
there is
That
a
was cool.
great scene. That stood
kids,
out to
yes,
us.
yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and we were like, don't you wish the movie opened here?
Oh, yeah,
Like then
yeah.
it would be like if they just took this and put it as the opening and started here.
And I like
Yeah.
that
I'd
the
be
girl's
totally in.
name is Liz Borden. It's like, what? That's
I don't
so
think I've ever
weird.
watched something I wanted to like more because of the personal. Like I got the copy and I went
yeah,
to
you
Rob's.
bought
it? Here's
So
the
my
thing.
wife's sister's dad is
Yeah.
the lead. He's the guy who goes there trying to buy the house.
No way.
Yeah, and his name was Bill, and he was the cowboy on Hollywood Boulevard, the cowboy who would freeze.
Oh, you guys, wait
Forever.
a second. You guys talked about this on one of my off weeks.
Yeah.
Yes,
and it was
I
a long
heard
time
about
ago.
that.
in the
That's right.
But it was like one of those things I had always heard. He was in this one horror film, and I finally tracked down
Holy
the film.
shit. That's
And so I
right.
saw, and he
That's
was
right.
actually pretty good. He was Jack Nicholson's stand-in in
my
which is
God.
Beastwick. So he looked quite a lot like Jack.
I mean, look,
But,
this is my
yeah.
first time seeing the film. I bought it sight unseen. I just bought it. It was a cold buy. I think it's totally harmless. I think it's a lot of fun.
I agree with that. I don't think it's like a terrible movie. It's more just like
I
there's
said,
gross
there
about
are
it.
worse.
Yeah, there's much worse films.
The great thing on the Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray, though, is that there is so many special features. It takes up 2 pages of menu screens.
Really?
Oh, yeah. There's so many
yeah,
special
they're pretty
features.
Yours is the 88.
Yeah, mine was a
films,
different. I don't know
right?
why there's 2 versions of a Blu-ray on that movie.
Do you have an international version?
I don't know. I got it when it first
I
came
think
out. It was
you
88
got an
films.
international one that I think was all region.
Yeah, it's all region.
That's why we got it.
Does it have a red cover? Is it like a red plastic?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
88
clamshell. It's a red
films.
clamshell. So you got it from, I think you got the UK one.
It was a while ago.
Yeah. So this is so Vinegar Syndrome. If you guys are fans of Slaughterhouse, I definitely recommend. But there's a great special feature on it, which is Buddy and his father doing an anti-smoking in the theater campaign.
Wow.
And it's so funny because
A recent thing or old?
No. It's an old one that they
cool.
use like, in the late 80s. But it's his father sitting there smoking a cigarette in the theater going, there's no smoking in this theater. And meanwhile, Buddy's just oinking and making noises. And
Oh my god! Oh my god! That's funny. Well, we want to hear from those who love this movie.
Yeah.
If
Come
there
on,
are
join
any
me
of
on
them,
this,
let's hear it.
guys. Come on.
Wow.
Jump in.
So my next one is only available on VHS at the moment. I'm sure if you look really hard, you can probably find it online, but don't do that. Look for the VHS. This is called Sounds of Silence from 1989, and this is really obscure. The way that I happened upon this was somebody told me about it at a convention one time, and they were like, you're into like weird, obscure movies. Check this one out. I can't find it anywhere. And then I looked online, and the VHS was kind of pricey at the time, and so I kept trying to find like somewhere, and then eventually I just bit the bullet and bought the VHS because I couldn't find it anywhere else. From 1989. It's about a guy who inherits a house, and so he brings along, he inherits like a European mansion. And so when he goes there, he brings along his girlfriend and her 12-year-old son, and her 12-year-old son is deaf. And when they get there, they realize that there's something kind of creepy going on at the house and that there's these ghosts, but the only person who can hear and see them is the 12-year-old son who is deaf. And the movie, I can see why it didn't get... Actually, I still don't know why it hasn't come out because I see much worse films get nice, fancy Blu-ray releases all the time. So I highly recommend that some of the distributors out there look for this one. It does have a weird mixed tone because all of the scenes with the guy who inherits the house are kind of set up like a horror comedy where he's very over the top. He's very flamboyant, like a character from House or Reanimator, where he feels like he's in a horror comedy. Whereas as soon as it cuts to the scenes with the little boy and the ghost, it becomes this amazing, well-shot gothic horror like the others. And so it's got this weird kind of contradiction going on that was a little weird, but it has got some amazing horror sequences that I have not seen before. So I highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it. Also, the soundtrack was great, and it's got Troy Donahue in it.
So basically, they have to go to your house to see this movie?
I'm hoping that this is available somewhere else, or maybe it's under a different title on DVD.
I'm looking it up, and it's... Is this it?
No, 1989. You're on 92. 1989.
Right.
Sounds of Silence, 1989.
Art Garfunkel's.
Yeah, I shudder.
Oh, there it is.
There it is.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's like I shudder to think that this has never even made it to DVD because it's far better than a lot of the stuff that I see get releases. Slaughterhouse. But
shots fired.
I haven't seen Slaughterhouse since the 80s, so I won't go there. I haven't seen it.
She's also not a slasher.
Cinema Police
Yeah,
Card.
and I'm not.
Has been
Cinema
raised.
Police Card.
Cinema
I
Police.
haven't seen it since the 80s. I did not like it in the 80s, I will say. Like, I never had an urge to rewatch Slaughterhouse. But anyways.
You know what? The fact that can't be seen, that movie, I've investigated a few movies from that period that, like, never made it. And the answer I've heard to most of them usually involves the mafia.
Really?
Like, a lot of films that don't make it have fallen through the cracks because no one can trace the money and the distribution because there are so many corrupt
That's what
people
I always
in
heard is
distribution,
like
you know?
if, 12 different people put in, $500,000 to get to a $6 million movie, the idea of hunting down all 12 of those people in this day and age,
it's not worth
4 decades later is near impossible.
That's why there are some heroes behind the scenes who find the rights to these movies. Like, I mean, when Mutilator or something like that comes out, it's not been probably an easy road.
No,
and there's still a few films I'm waiting for in that way.
But I don't think that Sounds of Silence had as big of a release. Like, there are certain films that, like, I say, okay, it's probably a rights issue. Like, Fade to Black was a pretty big movie when it came out. It's probably a rights issue or something like that. But this one, like, I had never even heard of this. Like, I never remember seeing this on the video store shelves. Like, even something like Eyes of Fire, I have a recollection of
the cover.
Of it being on video store shelves. I just never rented it.
Yeah.
But this one, I was like, I've never even freaking heard of this. But yeah, it's got some really, really good horror sequences.
Now, the reason we love our listeners, sometimes they give us one of these titles.
Yeah. This one,
which is cool.
I think I got this one at Phoenix Comic-Con last year. Somebody told me about it. And yeah, it was a pleasant find. Soundtrack is amazing.
All right. She Creature, moving on.
Sounds of Silence. Yeah, good luck finding a
fine.
picture of this one for the Instagram this week.
I watched this was my new week. I don't usually watch all the new films. I watched The Girl with All the Gifts.
Hey.
Or I like to call it 28 Gifts Later. Totally.
That's a lot of gifts.
That's a lot of gifts.
That is a lot of gifts.
It does have a feel of either an extension of Day of the Dead or an extension of 28 Weeks Later. It kind of feels, especially when you leap into this kind of military-led world at the start. It's a really well-made film. It's a really solid made film. I like it keeps kind of reinventing itself every 30 minutes. It seems to become almost a slightly different movie, even though it's still tonally, visually consistent. I didn't realize it was a young adult novel, and in the last act, I could really tell that. When I was watching with Dick, in terms of feeling a little bit almost like the world building, like Hunger Games, and these kind of novels that are building almost a myth. I agree with you completely about how kind of just great the idea is. Like on a concept level, it is fresh. My only thing is it wasn't like Raw where I didn't love the movie. I just thought it was real. I felt like emotionally maybe at an arm's distance with it, unlike say Raw where it's like visceral and I'm dropped in. And I think, and I don't know, but I'll be interested to see when it hits more eyeballs. I wonder if it's a little bit of, on my end, because I have watched all of The Walking Dead, a little bit of burnout of just the world view and the vision of a post-apocalypse zombie, even though that is an original zombie tale.
I think the performances and the little girl and that kind of angle of
that's
being
really
a hybrid or whatever
is really original.
Just kind of overrode The Walking Dead.
No, it did, but because you don't watch it anymore, right? Yeah. And I feel like there's something about if you have kept watching it, there's something I think maybe I'm at a point where even though that was great, it still was familiar enough in terms of a visual.
Could it be because we get burned every week?
Yeah, we do. I mean, and this season has certainly been going down a road of burning us more than I feel like I'm investing more than it's giving me.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is a shame because I've been like, it's one of the longest defenders.
But I don't think it's The Walking Dead. I think it's just that we had such a glut of zombie films for a good stretch. Because even like when I watched Maggie, had I seen Maggie at the top of the zombie craze, I would have been like, this is a brilliant movie. But when I saw it last year, I was like, seen it.
I challenge that. I think it's the material because me and Ryan couldn't make it through Maggie, yet Train to Busan is like,
you're right. Okay,
again, so it's like, if the material's good.
I will say this. I think, and this is movie everyone, all horror fans got to watch it. I mean, this is not my negative side is just me, just a critical nitpicking. But I think the first third is just fucking brilliant. Like even what the zombies do, just like Train to Busan mixed it up, they mix it up here. And the way the stillness, and there's certain things that really surprised me, and I really like that. I think it's more like that feeling of where it chose to go, maybe just it wasn't completely for me. And there's a slightly Mad Max Thunderdome kids in there, and that always loses me.
That was really weird.
I always get lost with those kind of characters.
It was really weird, and I completely agree with you. But there's one moment in it that gave me chills. Yeah. Like there was like one of the Mad Max kids doing something.
Oh yeah,
I was like, oh my god.
No, this is just a very original film, and there's a reason why it was on the festival circuit. This is like one of the top 3 or 4 movies you have to see this year. That remains true. Yeah. So don't listen. But emotionally, I just do wonder if watching all this Walking Dead's kind of deadening a certain palate in us.
Yeah,
it's weird.
Probably. I got a couple more quick ones, but the New Beverly this week hosted a great double feature of Assault on Precinct 13, the John Carpenter movie, with something called Combat Cops, a.k.a. The Zebra Killer, a.k.a. The Get Man. But just to start on Assault really quick, because it's one of the Carpenter movies that I've seen the least. Like, it's not one I've revisited a million times like his other films. But I went with my buddy Robbie, who I used to work with at Amoeba, because he's not really a horror guy, but over the years I've been showing him Carpenter movies. Like, we watched They Live Together a couple years ago. And this is one I kept telling him about because it's his first film. I mean, I know technically Dark Star is, but like that was like his college film. This is like one of those first films from a filmmaker who is almost fully formed right away. Like between the style and the music and the execution and the story and kind of like that gritty Western feel to it.
I think it's one of his best made movies.
Yeah, I mean, right off the bat, it's just like, oh my God, like this is John Carpenter. Yeah. So we got to see that on the big screen. And again, because I don't watch that much, I had such an appreciation for it this time. And for so many reasons that Stan, I mean, the audience was great, the print was flawless, but really, I just listened on the way there to your podcast, Elric. You did on Cinema Police. You did on Pure Cinema. Show. Yeah, that's your third show.
I need a third podcast.
You and Brian had just done an episode specifically on revenge movies.
Oh yeah, that's our new one right now.
And the greatest, I think, what you guys were discussing on that, the greatest revenge story, the greatest like illustration of revenge is in Assault on Precinct 13 because a little girl gets killed and then the father in rage follows the guy, kills him.
Oh yeah.
And then checks out. And he's still there. It's like
he's like hollowed out.
But there's literally, it's like a little moment in the middle of the movie where you're seeing revenge fully played out and nothing changes. And in fact, it actually like destroys him.
It's the senselessness.
And the senselessness of it. And then he becomes the catalyst for like the shit that hits the fan for the third act.
That's a good point. I haven't thought of that one.
But yeah, that was one because you had just talked about it. I was listening to it on the way to the movie. That really stood out to me. And again, there's just, I think Brian Collins had written an article about this back when John was on tour. And I think I really believe it. The reason remakes of his films don't work is because he did the score. It is a part of his filmmaking language and his voice that it is so hard to separate. Like literally every time, like dun, 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 like as soon as the music started, you're like, this is a John Carpenter movie. And it's like, I don't know if you can, unless you reuse the theme again. Yeah. Like I don't, like it's so a part of, like Wes Craven didn't do his own music. So you could remake a Wes Craven movie and get the beats of it. But that's what I think is missing from every Carpenter remake, is that's a tiny piece of his voice that you can't reproduce. And that's why none of his remakes really work the same way.
And yet, I will say, of all the remakes, that's one I enjoyed in theaters. I was like, not compared to the original because it's a totally different movie.
Yeah, I've never seen it. I own it. I'm going to watch it now.
But I liked it. Like, I was one of those.
I hear it's pretty
this
good.
is a fun movie. Like, it's a fun action film, and Ethan Hawke and everyone's pretty good in it.
Yeah,
written by the James DeMonico, who did The Purge.
Get out of here! I didn't know that.
That's where
That's
it started.
crazy. Yeah, I'm going to visit that. And then really quickly, the second movie. So the thing that's magic about New Beverly's, so Austin Stoker is the lead of this movie.
Yeah.
And then as soon as it's over, he gets up from the audience. And you're like 40 years later, and here's the lead of the movie, gets up and talks to us for a little bit. But the second movie also starred him, and I think it was a couple years before it. And
is that the Black Panther one? Because the Zebra Killers? I remember
well,
that
it's
title.
called The Zebra. It is... we throw this term around a lot. It is bonkers.
Yeah.
Okay, because it is about a sadistic guy, a sadistic black guy that is going around killing random people for no reason. And it's everything from blowing them up in their cars to stabbing to throwing them off, and they're trying to figure out what the deal is with it. But the reason it's so disturbing is because you do see this killer pretty upfront in the beginning. And by his second scene, which is 10 minutes into the movie, it is a worse disguise than Soul Man. It's almost
Tommy, baby.
It is it's offensive to the point where you're like, that is totally a white guy in black makeup right now. No. But they give that away pretty quickly. Like it's like, I mean, think at the end of the first act, like you realize that it is a guy disguising himself as a black guy.
So it's a plot point, not a
plot point,
bad racist.
But that's what I thought. I was like, what is going on with this movie because of that?
Get out.
And and then there's some questionable things that happen throughout. I don't know. Maybe I missed it. I don't know if they ever explained why he dressed up like a black guy. Maybe I missed that.
Well, because I think the zebra killings were based on real random killings in San Francisco or something. I think that was a story. I remember hearing about a movie like that, whether it's the same story as what you're talking about.
I can't possibly imagine that. And it's got the most unlikely duo. Like Austin Stoker's the lead guy, and then he's got kind of like the white doofy partner. Who's just just there?
The guy from Silent Rage, same cop.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, they have karate lessons together. Like there's a scene where they're practicing karate. So it was really unlike anything I've ever seen before. And again, there's multiple titles. I don't think it's available.
Okay.
So that's part of the fun of seeing it. At the New Bev is you get to catch it that way. So great double bill, but yeah, Salt and Combat Cops.
Nice.
Right?
If you get a chance to see Assault on the Big Screen, please do so.
Yeah, it was so good. Man.
I saw it at the Egyptian, I think at Beyond Fest, and it was just amazing.
And every one-liner kills.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone.
Yeah, every nuance.
Little girl with ice cream. I mean, Jesus.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised in a crowd. You mean it's interesting to see the reaction, and some people stay quiet, but it's some of the other bigger moments that play really well.
Did you realize she's the girl from Real Housewives of Beverly Hills?
Oh, yeah.
I remember seeing that once going, oh my God.
Yeah. But it was great. I mean, this is a 40-year-old movie. My friend Robbie, who had never seen it, was shocked. He audibly was like, really? Yeah.
What did I see? I saw Drag Me to Hell.
Love it.
Obviously, I've seen it before. It came out in 2009. I've seen it many times since then, but my girlfriend and child have never seen it. And to watch it with a 13-year-old is amazing and also to watch it with my horror-loving girlfriend was amazing as well, because they didn't know the tone that was coming at them. Yeah. So this movie holds up every single time I see it. It's so energetic and it's so fun and it's so wet and gory
gooey
and clever. And that's the thing. Ciara's just like, oh my God, she's like gumming her face.
Yeah. The funeral scene where all the liquid comes pouring out of the body.
So good. But it's like Sam Raimi at peak form, you know?
Oh yeah.
Just and not just on like a fun roller coaster ride level, but on a storytelling level. Everything is very tight. Everything has a cause and effect. Everything has a motivation to it, it's really, really tight. But while I was sitting there watching it, I was like, fuck, man, this is not a new theory, but it's like it could fit squarely into the Evil Dead universe. And if only Sam had embraced that, he would be ahead of James Wan in I'm going to create a cinematic universe of all my wacky horror, ideas. Because it's because you can just imagine elsewhere in Michigan, Bruce dealing with the Deadites. Meanwhile, Alison Lohman's dealing with the fucking Lamia.
Well, also, it's one of the few films that I've seen in the last decade where I would have loved to have seen a second one, like In Hell,
my gosh,
Drag Me Back. It could be called, and like
Drag Me Back to Hell.
I mean, it's the energy of
Drag
that
Me
film.
Back to Hell, and it's actually Earth. She comes back in Trump America, and. Anyways, it was funny watching it and just being reminded of how fun it is. And what was really weird is Octavia Spencer's in this movie.
Oh.
Like from The Help, she's a known actress. But if you watch Alison Lohman in some of the bank footage, bank scenes, Octavia Spencer is just sitting at a desk watching things play out in the foreground.
She's just biding her time.
I was like, what the hell's going on?
I know this is going to work out. I just got to stay here.
Yeah, it was so weird. During the
scene.
whole nosebleed thing, she's there reacting in the background. I'm like, hey, there's Octavia Spencer.
Hidden figures.
Anyways, great film. I really wish it was embraced more. I wish more people talked about it more because I feel like it's one of the new classics.
And you watched the theatrical cut.
I watched
correct?
the unrated cut. I bought the unrated
I'm
cut.
actually anti-unrated cut.
Really?
Yes, and I've explained it before in the show, but to pretty much because that's not his director's cut for starters.
Right, yeah.
I think it changes the tone of some of the things that are supposed to be funny. To like the one example I give is there's a scene in the theatrical as it plays where she finds out she has to sacrifice the cat maybe to buy her time.
Yeah.
And the way it plays in the theatrical is she finds us out, she looks over, and then it cuts literally to the shovel doing the dirt.
Yes,
and in
yes,
the
yes.
theater,
And she's
everyone
stabbing.
laughed.
Yeah.
But now when I watch the Blu-ray, I'm like, it's just a long, drawn-out, nasty scene where she goes over and repeatedly stabs the cat. It's not it throws the tone off for that. It's just punchlines.
I forgot because I saw a test screening of it. I snuck into a test screening of it, and it was one of the greatest things because I was still a journalist at the time. And Universal saw us all sneaking in, and they didn't say anything. And
You're
who
not
sits
supposed
down?
to be at test screenings.
No. And who sits in front of us but fucking Sam Raimi?
Okay.
And because we were on set, he was like kind of turning around and he was looking at the crowd and he goes, "Oh, hey fellas." And he was like, "You're here to see the movie?" We're like, "Or you're here to see the picture?" And we're like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, it's a spookablast. It's going to be great." And we're like,
spookablast.
"Oh, this is fantastic." Sam Raimi approves of all of us journalists sneaking into Drag Me to Hell. Meanwhile, all the publicists are giving us the evil eye.
Nice.
And then afterwards, after he did like his little focus group, he asked us all to wait. Because he wanted to have like a mini focus group with all the journalists outside. And I was like, this is fucking brilliant. I love it.
$5 for anyone who can get us Raimi on this show.
But I was going to say, what I don't mind about the unrated cut is I think that's the cut I saw initially.
Oh, okay.
I think I might have seen that. Because, I mean, like I saw an early version of it. But anyways, brilliant movie.
All right.
Yeah. And also to see it, the kid lost her fucking mind. She was like literally hanging upside down in the chair, screaming during the anvil scene.
All righty. Well, it's great. You definitely should check it out.
We got a lot of brilliant shows still to come, so.
I
Lots of
mean,
it.
yeah. If you've been waiting, if you're excited for that Phantasm box set or just in general for Don Coscarelli, you're in for a treat. But before we go...
Hey, Ryan, when is Belko Experiment releasing?
Why, Bekah, that would be March 17th.
All right.
This Shockwaves episode is brought to you by the Belko Experiment. In a twisted social experiment, a group of 80 Americans are locked in their high-rise corporate office in Bogota, Colombia, and ordered by an unknown voice coming from the company's intercom system to participate in a deadly game of Kill or Be Killed. Written by the acclaimed writer-director James Gunn, known for Guardian of the Galaxy, and directed by Greg McLean from The Darkness and Wolf Creek, the Belko Experiment is a terrifying, provocative, and at times hilarious thrill ride that provokes the question, what does it take to survive at work?
Okay, and welcome back to the show. And we are beyond excited because literally hundreds of Killer POV episodes.
A long time coming.
40 some odd Shockwaves. We've been wanting this guest since the beginning.
I think we've been talking about him like when we first made our initial list of people we wanted on the show. This name was on there.
Always. And finally.
And you'll remember I also pitched him for Insidious 3. I tried to start a petition online for Coscarelli for Insidious 3.
Welcome to the show, Don Coscarelli.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Oh, man, this is so exciting. And there is so much we want to talk about, obviously, but I am going to jump right in if you guys don't mind.
Well, it's a good time. Well, I was going to say it's a good time to bring you on because Phantasm is coming out on Blu-ray in a box set.
April 11th.
Right?
Yeah. Right? Already pre-ordered it. Excited.
Oh, wow. It's pretty cool. There's a lot of good stuff there. And hours and hours of Phantasm enjoyment.
Right. And you're still not sick of talking about it.
Well, this will be the last podcast that I talk now. One of the really cool things is there's about a 15-minute documentary on the awesome hearse crash stunt from Phantasm 3. For the really obscure Phantasm fan, we went back to the original crash site and went in how that all happened. And there's two new commentaries, one from the Phantasm 1 with some of the original collaborators that I made the movie with. So there's a lot of stories that I hadn't thought about for decades. And then also a new commentary for Phantasm 3, which brought up some different aspects of that. So it's loaded with good stuff.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
No, I'm super excited for it. So one of the things I really wanted to talk about is I think around October time, I think BUBBA HO-TEP had just come out on Blu-ray. And a friend of mine was like, hey, have you ever seen Kenny & Company? And I'm like, no, it's one of the few Don movies I haven't seen. So we did a double feature of Kenny & Company and BUBBA HO-TEP.
Oh, cool.
And the reason I bring it up is because I just fell in love with Kenny & Company. I thought it was it's like one of those little gems that reminds you of childhood. And, we like to talk about filmmakers' childhoods as well on the show. Yeah. So I figured that would lead into it. But what really struck me is you made two definitive movies in your career, one a definitive one about youth, and then one a definitive one about, being old. So like that is a double bill worked in the weirdest way, because it was literally two films about those two things, like seeing life from a kid's perspective and then as an elderly. And I don't know if you've ever even thought of the idea that
Rob, I have never thought about that.
And who are you calling old?
And yet,
well, I'm not, but again, that also
there's a certain legitimacy to what you just said there, and it makes me think about how I came to make each movie and how old I was when I made them. I will tell you that when I met Kenny & Company, we shot the movie, I was 21 years old. And, when you're 21 and you're working with 12 and 13-year-olds, like they're little kids, all right? But then you think that they're like only 8 or 9 years younger than you are. So I was a lot closer to that whole thing at the time. And I think I could never make a movie like that now.
Right.
So lucky to have done that then. Now, getting interested in BUBBA HO-TEP, well, probably around the time, it was. My mom had passed away. Parents and friends of my parents were all getting older, and, some were headed towards the old folks' home, and that's a real horror story. Yeah. And, something that was, I was obsessing on a little bit. And so the Joe Lansdale story just spoke to me.
Yeah. And I mean, with Kenny & Company, how much of that is based on your youth? Because obviously it's
all true.
And it's funny because I was like, there's so many funny bits to it, but I was like, man, you can never get away with this now. Like one of the gags is the kid puts a mousetrap in a paper bag and makes one of the other kids put their hand in it. I'm like, oh, that would get cut out of a movie immediately because it would be, but we kind of did stuff like that when I was that age.
Well, childhood was a really dangerous time, and that's where the excitement came from. And see, when I grew up, you had the possibility of actually going out on Halloween night with your friends and with no parents, just disappear out the door for 5 hours. And it was the night that you would all look towards as this night of risk, this night of thrills, excitement and danger. And, I guess it sort of went away because now I certainly, accompanied my kids around to every trick or treat.
Mm-hmm. With that movie, why is it so hard to get these days? Is there a rights issue with? Because I think it's some of your earlier stuff I think is so wonderful, and I'd love for people to be able to see it.
Well, it was a movie that it was very exciting at the time because 20th Century Fox picked the movie up. And this was like pre-video, really dating myself here. And they put it out in a couple test markets, and then it just disappeared into their vault. And there's a cool guy who used to run Anchor Bay, and now he's at RLJ, Mark Ward. You guys probably
he was
know
on
Mark.
2 weeks ago.
Okay, well,
Mark.
Mark is awesome. And, one day he called me up and he said, hey, I'm looking at a list of 50 Fox movies available, and there's Kenny and Company. I'm grabbing it, And so they, Anchor Bay, this was, I guess, like 2006 maybe, they put it out. A really nice DVD version, which then went out of print, and now I see it on eBay for like $120 a copy. So, interesting, just side note, there may be hope because at Angus Scrimm's funeral, I hooked up with a guy named Steve Barnett, who directed one of the cool movies that both Angus and Bruce Campbell starred in, Mind Warp.
Oh, yes.
And Steve is now
a Fangoria film.
Yeah, that's right, yes. And Steve is now an executive over at Fox in post-production. And he actually found a high-def master of Kenny. And so then the next task for him is to get the marketing people or the distribution people to get it out somehow, as a Netflix.
I hope so. I'd love people to see it again. Yeah. And my friend Dan told me if this is true on the commentary, there's a fun scene in the movie where the kids go through someone's garage on Halloween, and it's kind of like a haunted house. People like jump out at them and stuff. And I think you said on the commentary that when you saw that scene in particular with audiences and audiences jumped, that's when horror hit with you being like, oh, that's fun.
Well, imagine, being a young filmmaker and sitting in an audience and showing your movie and getting laughs and going, oh, this is cool. The jokes are working, and they're laugh. And then you come to this little dark scene in a dark room, and suddenly this guy in this really freaky Don Post mask jumps out of the darkness, and suddenly like 200 people go, whoop, up in the air and scream. It's just like this moment of manipulation and control and excitement as a filmmaker. And then I'm thinking, hey, what if I made a movie like that with maybe 10 of those or 12 of those in it,
Well, I wanted to back up. You were 21 at the time. You were kind of getting exposed to the studio experience, as still a youngster at the time. I mean, where were you at in your life, and how did that whole experience start to change you a little bit in terms of getting your sea legs in the filmmaking system?
Ryan, it didn't change me at all because I was always so peripheral. I actually the very first film that I made, it was kind of a semi-student film that no one has ever seen, really. It was like a bootleg, really bad tape floating around called Jim the World's Greatest that starred an actor named Gregory Harrison, and Angus Scrimm had a great dramatic role in it as an alcoholic. And anyway, that's a great little Cinderella story for my early part of my career, because my father, when I was 18, my neighborhood friend and I convinced him to put up $25,000 to make an independent movie. And thank you, Dad. He'd had a good year in the stock market and decided, well, maybe I could be a movie producer too, So he gave us this money, and we made this movie and shot it all down in my hometown of Long Beach, and had this rough cut version of it. And my father was really freaking out at the time. And this was back in the day. He would call up the Los Angeles Times to the arts division, or whatever it's called, the calendar division, and Charles Champlin, the LA Times film critic, would actually pick up his own phone. Wow. So my father, and Champlin was a major known critic nationwide, and he and my dad developed a little friendly relationship, and he said, well, look, when the movie's done, let me take a look at it, and maybe I'll give you a couple ideas. So I guess I was probably 19 at the time, and my neighborhood friend Craig and I had co-directed this movie and co-written it. And there's a melodrama. It had some cool stuff in it. It was very 70s, in terms of a slice of life about a teenage kid. But anyway, bringing it around to your question is that we showed the movie to Champlin, and he, didn't seem that knocked out about it. He said, I'll think about it. I'll call you. And like 3 days later, he calls up and he says, I talked to the president of Universal. He wants to see the movie. You'll need to bring it over to his house this weekend. Wow. And so we sent Jim, the World's Greatest, over to the executive. His name was Sid Sheinberg, who ran Universal Pictures. And he and his family watched the film, and I heard that they really liked it. And they bought the movie for $250,000. And Craig and I, my partner, got an office on the Universal lot at like age 19 to go finish the movie. And the entire time, And we had total access to Sid Sheinberg in his 15th floor office in the Black Tower. Like no one else. We could just walk in there. Oh, we need to talk to Sid. And he'd go, come on in, boys. Well, what is it?
But I mean, were there other kids? I mean, were there other kids around your age that were on the lot? I mean, like, with that opportunity? Exactly. Well, that's insane.
So, and the marketing people didn't know what to make of it. And, they put it out in a couple test markets and it completely flopped. We lost the offices. That was over. So went back to Long Beach, shot this little kids movie, and 20th Century Fox saw it and bought it, put it out in a couple test markets, and it disappeared into their vaults. Wow. And so that basically set me up just right to decide to make a commercial movie. Because somebody had once told me that horror films were always successful. And obviously they are, aren't they, here at Blumhouse?
Because we only go backwards with our questions. I'm really interested. I'm interested in your household before this, because to have a father that willing to kind of dive in, was this like a cinema-loving household? And what age were you when you actually got the first instinct, like, I should try to make a movie, even if it was just a short or a Super 8 film?
The area that I grew up with, I had a little pack of friends that we used to run around with, and it was in a new suburb in Long Beach, a suburban tract, and it was being built in 2 phases. And so the first half was built, and that's where we lived, and I had these friends. And then there was this field with some construction debris on the other side, and so it was this place that was just completely ripe for anything you wanted to requisition in terms of wood or supplies, and it was big and it was empty and roads and that. And so I had my mom's 8mm camera, and we made a little Western epic, started with that, and then just, but before that, we were building boats and hot air balloons, doing all kinds of stuff over in this field, and it was just like the next, like a project-based youth that I had, and they kept getting, once I found film, then it was easy, or there was something that you can always keep making a larger and larger film. So
do you remember movies at the time that were like fueling that passion that were coming out?
Well, of course, because I grew up in the late 60s and 70s, and so the challenging cinema that I was watching as I was graduating, like in my last year of high school, and after that, the movies like Bogdanovich and The Last Picture Show, and Bob Rafelson and 5 Easy Pieces, and Costa Gavras with Z, and and Truffaut was still around. These are kind of more highfalutin movies we were watching, along with all the old Universal Classic horror stuff, and
things are changing. The studio model is changing. Independents were rising.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely true. Yeah.
So your dad was a cinephile?
Not at all.
Yeah, interesting. So he's just a smart businessman.
He wanted to produce.
Yeah.
I think it was more a function of, we had a plan. We laid out a plan of how, we could maybe be an investment that he could make money off of. What did we know at that time? The thing was we did know, and we were right, but we didn't know what the hell we were doing. Because, we had this all, we hired this professional crew, and we shot for 1 week. And after the first week, we were like a week over schedule. It was horrible. So we had to get rid of the crew and let them all go, and then draft all our friends and students to come, and then finish the film on more of a intermittent weekend schedule.
Right. When it came to Phantasm, landing on that idea as the horror movie you wanted to do, did it happen right away, or did you dabble like, oh, maybe we'll do like a vampire movie or some sort of subgenre? Because the thing with your approach to the genre is it's always unorthodox. Like anything you do horror-wise is not what I'd expect at all. So, and it seems like that was right from the get-go. Right with Phantasm.
I actually say, writing on that question as well, at the time, there was so much reactionary horror coming out. But I feel like yours is very familial and personal, I mean, like Wes was doing Last House on the Left. Everybody was doing something that was either a reaction to the times or Vietnam or whatever was going on. But yours just felt like it was the horror at home. It was the family drama. It was the sense of loss and all of that stuff. So yeah,
there's a little bit of youth being betrayed by the older generation in that film. I think there's something in there.
And the trend at the time was all the films had very linear plots. They were all very clearly laid out of this happens and this happens, and yours feels more like a stream of conscious. So I'm intrigued how you kind of landed on the idea and how that was like your decision to make it more marketable.
Well, this Monday morning quarterbacking of my career is interesting to listen to. But at the time, I'm not sure I knew what the hell I was doing, other than, I just had this notion of setting a movie in the context of, a mortuary mausoleum, the whole funerary industry. It just seemed ripe for it, and I couldn't remember a movie that had used those icons. I hadn't seen any films in recent memory at that time that had hearses or coffins, and I thought, well, that could be a really powerful setting for a movie. And then I'd made Kenny and Company, which starred this great kid actor in Michael Baldwin, and I thought, okay, well, we can work him in as the protagonist. It was really a part of it was a function of working with my little stock company of players, of actors that I'd worked with before and who were accessible to me and wanted to work with me and would put up with it. But the personal quality, not sure where that came from. I never had a brother. Maybe I always wished I'd had one, because I think that, now that you get older and a number of decades have gone by in terms of the response, and I meet a lot of fans at those conventions, their response is very heartfelt, and I wish I could take credit for it, but I'm not sure I can. But we're so impacted by the relationships in the movie, and I don't remember starting out to make a relationship movie. Yet I think about those first two movies, and they were kind of slice of life character studies. So I guess I was still in that mode.
Well, it's rare for a horror film to have like a character come around to see another character and go, hey, man, let's just play guitar for a couple seconds and stay in that moment. I think that might be the moment where people it changes how they view the movie. It's not just a genre picture at that point. It's something else.
That would be the first scene now that they're like, we got to cut out that
guitar.
Of course,
No, you're not kidding. And the funny part about it is we had two songs. We had two full. Reggie did an entire song. They sat there and sang two songs. I said, I'm going to have to take out one of these. So maybe that's how it stayed in, as Reggie's song was The Sacrificial Lamb.
What about that dream logic side of things? Was that something like Bekah was talking about, stream of consciousness? But that was pretty unusual for the way you used it.
I think that it was somehow innately understanding early on that mystery was going to be our friend in the making of this movie, and that not giving away too much was going to be okay. Certainly in editing, we to keep the movie running more smoothly, we cut out some of the connective expository stuff. And I made decisions, and along with my co-producing partner, Paul Pepperman, who was just an incredible part of the making of this movie, we made decisions to lop stuff out and figuring that the audience would follow along with us, and luckily they did.
Well, I just remembered that a lot of footage that you shot for one ended up in part 4. And you shot over a long period of time. So was there a point where you honed in on what this film exactly was? Because it seemed like you were shooting and trying a lot of ideas and trying to figure out exactly what would make Phantasm. And then you obviously abandoned a handful of things that you reused later on. But was there a moment when you guys were editing it that you're like, oh, this is exactly what this movie has to be?
There's no question that the movie was probably built in the editing. And the great part about it, because again, credit to my father, who had been this investment counselor in Long Beach and had some success with those first two movies. And he had found some crazy investors who were willing to back us on this thing. But we were able to do it in an unconventional fashion. So we were able to shoot for 3 or 4 days and then stop for a week, and figure out what we would do next. It's not the traditional way of making a movie where you're in this race to get from day 1 to day 25 or whatever. And so consequently, I shot sequences with Angus and Kathy Lester, and then, after a month or two, thought, maybe they're the same person, And so then I was able to go back and film shots where they could, sort of semi-morph through editing into them. And, and at one time, and when we started shooting, the older brother was not going to be dead. He was just going to be a character. And then in struggling to figure out that ending, then another one of my collaborators, Roberta Quezada, had said, I wonder if Jody could be dead because he's always driving a black car, And I thought, that's kind of a cool idea, and thought that out. And, then that showed up in the final ending that we shot. So it was an unconventional way to make a movie, and so the result was somewhat unconventional, I guess.
And had the first 2 films that you had done, which are very character heavy as well. How did those help inform you going into Phantasm and dealing with actors?
Well, I certainly, to Angus's everlasting regret, one of the things that I learned on those first 2 movies is that you probably want to keep the dialogue scenes to no more than about 2 pages, because we had some 5 and 8 page dialogue scenes on my first film that we ended up just cutting viciously. And, so consequently we end up with Angus, and he's just got like 1 line every 10 minutes. I learned about that, not to overstay your welcome in terms of the dialogue scenes. In terms of working with the actors, as I worked with the first film that I made, and this is, again, thank you, Angus, is actors terrified me. I mean, because they were usually older than me. They usually knew what they were doing. I didn't, and my partner Craig and I certainly didn't have ourselves organized. Always the crew and cast were always going, you need to do your homework, and so now anytime when I'm, going into film, here we are, years and years later, I am always thinking, have I done my homework? Am I prepared for my shot? So these things stuck with me. I was certainly very intimidated by Angus because we'd made so many mistakes in the logistics, and he'd have to sit down there on Jim the World's Greatest in this little tenement apartment building from like 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then it'd be my job to walk down the hall and say, sir, we're not going to get to you today. And then he would give me the tall man look, and I would step back. And so, but over time, I was able to learn, which, lesson to aspiring filmmakers out there is that, most actors are not angry with the director or not messing with the director. They really just want to know where they're supposed to stand and what they're supposed to do. So if they're clear on that, and you really make that clear up front, you have a lot less problems with anything because,
They're complicated people. They just want to know where to stand, okay?
I was going to say, when did you lose that intimidation? Where did you feel like you hit your stride and had a sense of confidence once you got on set?
Well, I'm going to say, probably not till BUBBA HO-TEP, maybe. I was still, the Phantasms were different, because I've directed the 4 Phantasms. So by Phantasm 3, certainly, these are like all lifelong friends of mine, except, a couple of guest players coming in. So there's never any of that. But,
what was the most intimidating, like going into a whole separate world of, where you just feel like you are the novice in a sense like that?
Yeah, absolutely true. But, I think that the other thing that I have also developed, because, at the beginning, I'd get very aggravated with actors. They wouldn't do what you wanted, and they'd give you a lot of grief, and they'd want things, or they want time off, and, maybe wouldn't necessarily devote themselves to the film as much, and all kinds of demands. But the point is that I started to realize how much movie making was demanding of actors and how much pressure was on them. And so that explains a lot of, behavior, why they like to, smoke weed in their trailer or drink or, yell at people or yell at you or, was because, basically you have this movie being made that's almost like you spend weeks and weeks and weeks in pre-production building this pyramid. And then the first day of shooting, you like flip the pyramid over and you put the point right on the actor's head and you go, action, and it's up to them to like bring this whole thing to life. And there's, a lot of pressure. It's easier for a director to stand back and the take looks terrible, go, well, let's try that again, but the actor's got to get up there and, and it involves so much control over every muscle and, I don't know. That's why I've never acted in any of my films. I really admire actors now.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the mythos behind Phantasm and kind of where you came up with the idea. Was there ever a point where you like sat down and said, okay, the guy's going to take the dead bodies and then here's what happens with them? Or how did the mythos come to fruition?
Yeah, is there a Phantasm Bible that eventually...
like the biology of this planet.
You kept adding to.
We leave that to the fans. They are writing the Bible out there, and they'll let me know when I've deviated. Bible. No, there wasn't a Bible. I don't know, to tell you the truth. I mean, I sound like I don't know what I'm doing here with this project, but, I had a vision for certain things, and I was doing things on an instinctual level that only later I figured out what I was doing and why I liked them, because it wasn't until I made BUBBA HO-TEP, and I'd worked with Joe Lansdale, who has made this career of his out of doing these genre mashups, where Joe will, I don't know if you read like Zeppelin's West, where it's like the Tin Man and Wild Bill Hickok and somebody else. There's another, and I think it's an animal character. They're all on a Zeppelin going to the West. So mixes all these things and makes art out of it. Yeah. And which he did with BUBBA HO-TEP, because he took mummies, he took Elvis, but Elvis is still alive, and Jack Kennedy, and puts it all, it's like a political thriller and a mummy movie and all that stuff. And then I started looking at Phantasm, and I'm thinking, oh, well, many years ago I was doing a mashup because I wanted to be a horror film, but it was actually a sci-fi film, but it was actually a fantasy film. So these were the kind of things that I obviously respond to, things that I like, and so may answer why, in some respect, why Phantasm's so weird.
Mm-hmm. How early did you discover Lansdale's work? Because I loved you do an intro to the collection of one of my favorite stories of all time, The Drive-In, which I know you've also tried for a long time, right, to make, which I'm also curious, like how that's going, if there's ever light at the end of that tunnel. But it was kind of a beautiful intro to a collection, because it's also about friendship and like meeting someone who you like to work with. You want to be with this, write with this person at his house, or he was at your house. I can't remember which way, but just speak to like discovering another artist's work who you get that interested in wanting to adapt.
Well, it was real simple, and that it was just a function of reading short stories and books that just seemed so cinematic and filmic, and yet also had some of those weird twists to them. It just seemed so obvious. And it was always a great surprise to me that I was the first filmmaker to get one of his movies mounted, because I started, I read his books, and I think it was 1990 or 1989, and I had gone down to, there was a genre bookstore. I don't know if anybody ever went there on Ventura Boulevard, called Dangerous Visions. And I went in there, and there was a guy behind the counter, and I said, what's new and cutting edge in horror these days? He said, well, follow me down to the Joe Lansdale section. And he said that Joe's always got a high body count. And I thought, oh, that sounds cool, And I think he was way off, because he does have a high body count frequently, but that's not the the charm of his work. But at any rate, I had taken the drive-in and I think another one called The Night Runners and went home and read them, and they were great. And a good friend of mine, Jeff Connor, had a publishing company called Scream Press, so he was connected with a lot of genre writers, and he got me Joe's wow, was this before email? I think he got me his phone number, and I called him up. And he had just licensed the rights to Dead in the West. Dead in the West was another great story of his, but no, to the drive-in. But he invited me to come down to Nacogdoches, Texas, and see if we could cook up a project. So I got to spend a weekend down there, and it was really cool. He's a really super nice guy and his family. So
no one did anything with the rights to the drive-in then?
No, it was never made. And then it wasn't until a few years later. I had hoped Joe would let me know about his new stories and books, but I was there in the Joe Lansdale section a few years later, and I saw this collection of short stories, and there was this, the first one on the list of short stories that said, Elvis Fights Mummy, and I'm like, I love that idea. So I bought the book and read it and got it from him. And but then I would have thought that after Bubba Ho-Tep, somebody would have made another movie immediately of his because there's so many cool stuff. And then I ended up doing the other Joe Lansdale story, the incident on and off of Mountain Road on the Masters of Horror show. So that's how that happened. And then, of course, Cold in July.
Which was, quite a different tone. It was a great movie.
I love
really cool
that movie.
Yeah,
that one's great.
really
but,
good stuff.
It's fun. I had a really great experience seeing Bubba Ho-Tep for the first time. And I don't know if this was the first screening, but this is going back several years. It was Flashback Weekend. It was like the first year they were doing this convention in Chicago. And Bruce was there, Bruce Campbell, with all the ladies of the Evil Dead, and they were showing Evil Dead on the big screen. Yeah. And my memory is Bruce said, stick around, you're going to get another movie with Evil Dead. And a month before that, I saw him touring his first book, and someone had brought up Bubba Ho-Tep, and he's like, it's a real sicko movie. He's like, just wait till you see. He's like, I'm Elvis Presley, but nobody's ever played this version of Elvis, etc. So, I mean, you hear that wacky premise of him teaming up with a black JFK to fight a mummy at a East Texan old people's home. But when the movie played, it was the perfect audience. It just killed. It was such a great, memorable experience because no trailers, no nothing about it. It's just I had one log line and then it played. And what really blew me away about it then and even now to this day is how it's just a very emotional movie. I get very emotional thinking about how the elderly are viewed in it and all. And basically, I'm trying to think of what my question is regarding Bubba Ho-Tep. It's just, I love that movie and I feel, it's one of your most personal works, even though that's not, guess what I was getting at is for a ludicrous premise, it's one of the most straightforward emotional stories. And I think Bruce Campbell, and I love Bruce, I think that's the best performance he's ever given in anything. And I mean, on paper, it's like he's playing Elvis in makeup at 7 years old or whatever. But there's something about his performance in that movie that I think is just absolutely fantastic. And God bless Ossie Davis for doing that movie. Because the second he shows up, you're like, those two together. Like, I can't believe that exists.
Playing JFK. For anyone who hasn't seen the movie.
Yeah.
He thinks he's JFK.
So, I mean, did you get a sense of that even just when you first read the story, that there's an emotional...
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I read it after I saw the movie, and I'm like, I would never imagine this is a movie. Yeah. Ever. I don't know how you thought to like, I can make this.
Well, there was the moment was there in the short story when, JFK passes on and Elvis salutes him and he goes, Mr. President. And I remember reading that in the short story and a tear started coming down my eye. And I was thinking, wow, this is really powerful. And there was so much, especially, the movie came out and watching people's reaction to it and all of that, there's so much depth to the story that, about the fact that, wow, if Elvis and JFK could wind up in an old folks' home, now where does that leave us? And that's like a real horror show. The idea that at the end of your days, after a wonderfully rich life of, children and accomplishments, that you can just be so ignored and discarded. And I will tell you that there's that maybe my early obsession with old age stories like this comes from this great song by one of the great working folk singers, John Prine. I don't know if anybody's ever heard it. It's called "Hello in There."
I don't know that one, but I know John Prine. He has some really kinky songs. But
well, this
Christmas in Prison was his
big
hit.
Exactly. Yeah, and Mommy caught Daddy kissing Santa under the Christmas tree was I think the line or something. But at any rate, he had this song about old folks, and essentially it was a message to, if you see an old person on the street someday, say hello in there, and it always kind of stuck to me because, I probably could have been nicer to my grandparents and, a lot of the regrets that you have as you get older. At any rate, not to get too heavy here, but
we don't get smart till the end. That's the problem. by then we've used it all up.
But I think that's what's beautiful about the movie. I mean, there's so many scenes in it, like, the girl at the beginning throwing away the Purple Heart.
Oh, yeah.
And
Can
it's
you
like,
imagine?
really? Like, the Purple Heart?
Yeah,
And there's a line that Bruce's character, Elvis, says, something like, you can't even curse anymore without, offending. Everyone just thinks everything you do is stupid and kind of cute.
Or sadly amusing.
It's sadly amusing,
line.
that's the line, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty touching, actually. But in any case, how did Ossie Davis get into the role? Because of course, Bruce's performance, I agree with you. He was awesome. If we would have had a real distributor, maybe those two guys would have been up for some awards, but unfortunately I had to self-distribute the damn movie for the theatrical part of it.
Was Bruce in from the get-go? Was he the guy you wanted for that role? There's no one else?
I was thinking about the usual suspects, the Kurt Russells, et cetera.
Yeah, well, Kurt had played him before, so.
At first, yeah, but... I'll tell you the God's honest truth about how Bruce Campbell came to this movie. So I had met Sam Raimi when I was making Phantasm 2, and I was over at Universal. And actually, Sam was really helpful because he had just made Evil Dead 2, and he turned me on to Mark Shostrom from Makeup Effects. Yeah. And Phil Duffin was his production designer and designed the cabin in Evil Dead 2. And so, Sam and Rob were both very helpful at that time. And I think they were mounting were they making Army of Darkness or Darkman, one of the two, I can't remember. But anyway, hadn't talked to him for a while. And I came back to my office one day after I'd gotten the rights and didn't know what I was going to do with this. And there was a message on the machine from Sam's assistant, and it said that Sam was hosting a retrospective screening of Close Encounters of the Third Kind over at one of the studio lots, and I was invited. And I thought, that's interesting and bizarre. And so I called him up because I couldn't come, and I wanted to say, I can't come, but thanks for inviting me. And Sam's assistant, I think, was on the line. He goes, what screening? What? Wait a minute. And he goes, and then Sam came like, what are you talking about? What screening? And so it was some kind of prank call. Somebody had called my phone, and I don't know, they had his number, and it was on my machine. Okay, so how did that happen? But at any rate, so I'm talking to Sam, and we're laughing about that. And I need to talk about what you're working on. And he's telling me about what he was working on. And he said, what are you working on? I said, well, I just got this book. It's about, Elvis and all this. And he goes, you should get Bruce Campbell. He's a great actor. And in my head, like I'm listening, and it sounds just like me when I'm talking about Reggie Bannister or Angus Scrimm. I go, yeah, you should get Angus. He's a great actor. Because, pitching your friends, I'm going, yeah, right. That sounds good. And then he goes, I'll have him call you. And I hung the phone up, and literally within 5 minutes, Bruce calls up. He goes, I hear you're making this Elvis movie. And I said, yeah, maybe we should get together and talk about it. And so we did. And, there was a lot of, I'd like to take credit for thinking that Bruce could do the role, but he kind of looked like Elvis when I met him. Yeah. And,
he has a very Elvis way about him as well.
And yet
swagger.
Swagger.
Yeah, there's a lot of good comedy in it. So I started really thinking seriously about him, and it worked out beautifully. Ossie, on the other hand, was more a function of going and trying to pitch his agent. And I had actually gone and watched Ossie at a book signing, and he was with Ruby Dee, and they had written an autobiography, and I wanted to go up and talk to him, but I just didn't have the nerve. But I just watched him there, and he just was like Kennedy there. Well, he's talking, people would ask him questions. I thought, God, this guy's just perfect. I've got to figure out a way to get him in the movie. So I started talking to his agent. The agent read the script and just didn't get it. And then I heard that Ossie sort of liked the script, and then Ossie was going to do it, and then he backed out. And I actually even got my friend Mick Garris, who had directed him in The Stand, I think it was. I said, Mick, would you write a letter to Ossie and tell him I'm an okay guy and do the thing? And I think that might have done the trick.
That's awesome.
But I will tell you, on the set, I remember, he and Bruce developed a relationship, which I think really worked, because they're two guys from completely different areas. Bruce is like the horror icon from all these blood and guts movies, basically. And then you've got Ossie, who's this historian and writer and director and social activist, and they're both kind of working class in a way. They respected each other's work ethic, I think I saw. And then he, but I know on several occasions I'd hear Bruce over there go, Ossie, how'd you get in this movie? Why are you in this movie? And he'd go something like, well, I met several presidents. I never thought I'd play President Kennedy, but...
That's unexpected.
Now, what was Ossie's response when he finally saw the final project?
Well, this is a good question. I never showed the movie to him. No, he was back in New York City. We made valiant attempts to get him to come to the Toronto Film Festival. I think that was one of my great regrets, that he could never see it with a genre audience, because I don't think he knew a whole lot about the genre. And I think that there would have been a huge amount of outpouring of love for him for that thing. And I wish definitely. He could have witnessed it. But I did hear later from his family that he knew about all the success of it, and he was that the family really enjoyed the movie a lot, and they were screening it occasionally.
You said something about the distribution, that you had to do it independently, and that's funny, because something I had noted about your work, and for a long time I thought about, is that it always seemed like you always want to be very much in control of the product, but now I'm starting to wonder, was it out of necessity that you had to become producer, distributor of certain films?
Completely out of necessity. We took the movie to a number of film festivals, and no distributor had any interest in this movie. And it's kind of freaky, because I've had this experience twice in my life, because I made Phantasm, and here we can, decades later, can say, okay, well, Phantasm was like a commodity which was worth a certain amount of tens of millions of dollars, and we took it out to every distributor, and it was like pass, except for the visionaries at Avco Embassy, who saw it and did such a great job distributing it. Same thing with BUBBA HO-TEP. The people didn't get it, didn't see it. And yet, once we started putting it in theaters, I was hearing people were coming from, 5 hours away coming to see the movie because they'd heard about it and wanted to see it, So that was a big frustration. The thing that was really frustrating, though, was that there was an executive over at MGM at the time, a guy named Jack Turner, and I guess he had looked at the movie and was thinking about maybe picking it up, but they hesitated, or his bosses weren't into it or something. And then Jack came to me we had the movie booked in 30 theaters over the next 8 weekends. And it was my wife and this great UCLA graduate student named CJU, and the three of us were self-distributing the thing out of our house. We had the 35 prints, we're shipping them and all that stuff. And Jack called up from MGM. He goes, we've been talking about the movie over here, and we're thinking, we've got this horror release coming up, and maybe we could trailer on that. And I said, where were you 6 months ago? And so there was no way to make that happen. But it was a perfect alignment because they knew and they started to see and they came out and saw how it was doing in those opening things. And so then MGM stepped in and took all the DVD rights and all of that and did a really nice job distributing them.
So it wasn't based on, because you started as a complete indie with your dad's money and then working with studios on certain films. Did any experience from that push you back in the direction of wanting to be independent again, or were those experiences that made you want to make bigger and bigger movies?
Elric, I've been trying to sell out for a long time. Okay?
That's often what we hear.
The truth is that, filmmaking is a very difficult thing, and getting funding is extremely difficult. And, some folks get handed things, like a already written script and $25 million and a major distribution. And I don't know, it's never really been my lot in life, unfortunately. But I will say that having the freedom of making some of these independent films has really been wonderful. And I've been able to make, in most cases, except for The Beastmaster, I've had pretty much creative control on my movies. And except for Phantasm 2 and regarding Michael Baldwin, the actor there. But for the most part, it had a lot of control. The sad part about it, though, is that the independent film model financially is just disappearing. Without the DVD money that was there, and even without the audiences going to theaters, and supporting independent film, it's really never been more difficult. So I think it might be an end of an era, truthfully.
Yeah. Don, I'm curious, after Phantasm came out, there's a ton of great horror filmmakers that were coming out of that scene. Who did you become closest to right off the bat? Were there any horror filmmakers or contemporaries that came forward and you became buddies with or took you under their wing?
Well, one of the exciting things, and I have the tape to prove it, was during the exposition of exploitation of Phantasm, which was interesting because Avco Embassy didn't have the funds to release nationally. So they were releasing regionally. So they had 500 prints that they were cycling, starting in the Southwest and then moving across. Right. So we were in New York that summer in the East, and they said, "Oh, we've got this booking for you. We're going to put you on this show called The Tomorrow Show with Tom Snyder, and we've got you booked on it with George Romero because he has a new movie coming out." So George was one of the first real horror filmmakers I ever met. Yeah. And unfortunately, we didn't really spend much time after that appearance. But I certainly, listening to him talk before and after, the struggles that he had gone through in terms of the funding on his movies. Truthfully, I'm trying to think of the other horror filmmakers. I know a lot of them nowadays. It's much more easy. I think back it was harder to meet them because there was no social media. There was no
dinner.
Email.
There was no dinner club. They just have a horror director's dinner club.
Well, I was always curious because, you were one of the first filmmakers to come out, to lead the Masters of Horror series. And to the fans out there as well as the horror fans, we just see it as, a kid growing up in Connecticut, it's like, all the horror directors are all pals. They must hang out in L.A. And, so I was always curious, because we get this mental image of all you guys hanging out or exchanging notes and all this stuff. So I was just always curious as to where you always felt within the pack, what your place was.
Well, I don't know where my place was. I will tell you this, though. That first so-called Masters of Horror dinner was one of the most fun nights of my life. I got this, Mick Garris had called up because, I will say a bone to pick with Mick is that he had this great interview show back in the day of early cable on the Z channel.
Yeah, we've interviewed him about it.
Yeah, and I would watch those and I would always, people go, "Hey, Don, how come you're not on that show?" And he never invited me. So then you can imagine how excited I was one day because I don't know where I met Mick through some family friends, and he called me and said, "I'm going to have some directors. We're going to go meet for dinner." And I said, "Oh, that sounds great." And the cool part about it is those particular gents who were at that first dinner, it was just a revelation. I mean, because they were all they wanted to do was talk about your movies. Nobody wanted to talk about their own movies, you know, and they were really, because everybody in that group, from Stuart Gordon to John Carpenter to Tobe Hooper to Guillermo del Toro, they were all, you know, charter subscribers of Famous Monsters of Filmland, and they wanted to talk about, you know, genre movies and stuff. And then it was Guillermo was the one who had coined the phrase, because some woman was having a birthday dinner across from us, and he, in his garrulous way, he got it. He says, "The Masters of Horror wish you a happy birthday."
Who was the biggest fan of who was most interested in Phantasm? I'm just curious of their tastes. Like, do you remember who?
Oh, I know Tobe Hooper had really kind words to say, and it was such a bizarre experience for me, because having, you know, I saw Chainsaw Massacre, I think it was in the second round, where I went into a theater and there were like 6 people there, and there was this like bonding experience with people that are just, you don't know. And like the girl goes on the meat hook and you're going, oh God, you know, when you're, and yeah, he's just a super nice guy.
Of the Phantasm films, you know, obviously the first one's going to mean a lot. Of the sequels, I should say, which one means the most to you on an emotional level? Is there one standout?
Well, no, it's hard to say that there's just one, Ryan. I would say that, look, the movies, each one has its strengths and its weaknesses. Like most filmmakers, you know, I watch my own movies and all I see are the flaws. You know, watching David Hartman's newest Phantasm Ravager is a really emotional experience with the way that it ends for me, because, you know, not only are all of those actors getting older, but Angus had passed away. And so that's a meaningful segment for me to watch, certainly.
And it feels like Reggie's almost being wheeled into the same house as Bubba Ho-Tep.
Yeah, exactly. Like he's, you know, it's not I think it followed the reality of that pretty well. You know, look, it's hard to say. You know, they're like your kids. You know, look, Phantasm 2, road picture, action, biggest makeup effects we ever had, biggest budget. Love that part of it. Phantasm 3, I tried some stuff, got to make a zombie film in my own way, you know, got in some initial rebukes from the fans, but I think once they realized that it wasn't the last in the series, they're much more accepting of it now. And by the way, the new, in the shameless plug for the box set coming out, completely lovely restoration of Phantasm Part 3 from the original negative. So it's like it never looked better. And then Phantasm 4 containing material from the original. So there's the nostalgic factor for me. And then also, you know, so I was, you know, I'm not sure it was really celebrated when it came out, Part 4, but I think it had some interesting, certainly at the time it was going to be the end of the series. And so, you know, I think the way it left each of the characters was kind of cool, in that, you know, tall man, game over, he won, you know, and departed the scene with a final look. And then you had Reggie, who was, you know, always, you know, warrior to the end, you know, just throwing himself into the abyss to continue the chase. And at the time, there was going to be no Part 5. So I thought, how cool to just have your hero just go off into infinity, you know, still fighting the fight. And then, you know, then being able to take the old footage and then maybe make it seem as if all 4 movies were a time loop, which was never in the cards when we made Phantasm 1, but, you know, something over, you know, a couple of decades I could kind of cobble together.
That following of your instinct that you're talking about on the first Phantasm, is that something you managed to keep on each film, or did you become more of a organized, traditional director? Because when I saw John Dies at the End, and we've talked about it quite a lot on the show, that and before The Devil Knows You're Dead by Sidney Lumet. When I saw both those films, you could have told me they're by 22-year-olds.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not kidding. The energy of both those movies, and I think Lumet was probably 80. And, you're
not
definitely
quite there
early
yet.
40s or something. But, John Dies at the End feels like a young man's movie.
Yeah.
Just everything about it. The style, the subject, the kind of wackiness.
The questioning of reality and life. And
we mean that as a...
No, it's a great
No,
thing. It's an energy thing.
That's so nice of you to say. I will, I'd like to take all the credit, but again, just a brilliant young author in David Wong / Jason Pargin. I read that book and it just most of it jumped out at me. Some of it was unfilmable, but I thought this is really interesting and contemporary. And what I really liked about it most was that it was completely different than me or anybody from my generation, because these two guys were so apathetic about stuff. Like there'd be a monster, you go, well, yeah, kind
it's fun. That's
of weird, And whereas in every other movie, it'd be, "Wah, get your gun," And it's I like that sensibility. So it was
now,
fun to,
when you originally read it, was it with the intention of somebody handing it to you saying this would be cool for a remake, or were you reading it as kind of just, I'm reading a book?
Okay, this is another absolutely God's honest, true story. I received an email one day from a robot from Amazon, and it said, "Don Coscarelli, if you like that zombie book you just bought, you're going to love John Dies at the End."
Wow.
And that's how the movie was made. And then the more I thought about it, once we made the movie, I kept thinking, oh, wow, so Korak can control Amazon, and he decided he wanted a movie made about him.
Yeah.
But it's weird how how things come. And that was, it was submitted to me by this robot. And of course I read it, and it was like exactly the kind of thing that I like. I mean, how freaky is that?
I think it was Sam Raimi's assistant.
Yeah.
He got a new job
same
Jeff
one.
Bezos, and it all filters. Did you know Giametti was a horror fan? Because that's something I didn't know about till after that film.
I had, somebody had given me a awards variety like the one sitting out in the lobby of Blumhouse here. I was just reading one of those out there, and it had an interview with Paul Giamatti, and I'm like reading it, and I'm going, "Which director would you like to work with?" And it said, "Don Coscarelli."
Oh,
why?
wow.
And it said,
Why?
because I saw this movie Bubba Ho-Tep, and I just thought it was so cool.
Oh, wow.
And,
That works for him, because he did the same thing on some talk show, and they're like, "What superhero movie would you want to be?" He's like, "I want to play the Rhino." In Spider-Man. You can find it on YouTube.
Wow.
And the producers saw it, and they're like, "We should cast him as the Rhino in the next movie." So apparently he just throws it out there. Then
Put it out in the
See,
universe.
Elric,
Somebody's
sometimes when you
gonna
just
get it.
pitch on a show, sometimes
maybe it will work
miracles
for you.
happen.
Well, also
Predator, it's coming.
Well, we also are
Predator.
all big fans, and obviously Chase has been in a lot of our friends' films lately, but
Oh,
in that
God.
film is one of those real
He's in my
surprises. So, yeah, somebody that youthful and young first film, and it just nails it. Like you'd think total intimidation being across from Giametti.
yeah, no, a little more on Paul. Paul's loves horror and genre, and he's a really avid reader, and everybody seems to pigeonhole him into like this indie actor, but he's got a broad range of interests from Civil War and other kinds of stuff. But Chase, the casting process in a movie, I think for a director, can be one of the most frightening aspects of making a movie, because it's the first time that you see especially when they do the readings, and what if it sucks? And you sit there and you watch the wrong actors reading the thing, and you start to doubt, like, what am I doing? This is going to be terrible. And then you have a moment when somebody like Chase wanders in, and he did the scene, and it was so good. I grabbed the script and I gave him, there's a long sections of narration. I gave him, "Can you just read this narration?" And he starts reading it, and I'm going, I could see the movie for the first time.
So cool.
Wow.
So that was really we were so lucky to have him. And what was great about he and Rob Mays, the two actors that played that, is they were so gung-ho and into making the movie that, we would just go, first off, we had them on like 15-week contracts so we could shoot the movie intermittently, which was great, and they were happy to get paid, although very little for that period. But the other part about it was that, it was just that, sometimes, the way that we did the movies, we would bring in the more known actors for a weekend, like, Clancy Brown would come in, or Glenn Turman, or Doug Jones, and we really only had one dressing room on the thing. It was this nice office, and we'd go, Chase, Rob, would you guys mind like hanging out over in the office pool over here, because we've got to give it to to Paul or to Clancy, and they'd always go, cool, no problem,
Yeah,
so
good.
Wow.
Good guys, both of them, good actors.
I know there's a sequel book that I haven't read yet, with a really great title, which I'm forgetting now. Something
This
about
book
spiders.
is full of spiders?
Yes.
Yeah, seriously, dude, don't touch it.
Yes, that's a great title.
Not a warning.
I'm curious. I mean, is that the?
It's great, by the way. It's about these large spiders, like about this big, and they implant themselves at the base of the skull and control people. So
That's
what's
amazing.
not to like?
Well, besides the Phantasm movies, which you kind of stayed involved with, I mean, is that something that even interests you? I know you tried to do a sequel to Bubba Ho-Tep for a while, and there is a John Dies at the End sequel. I mean, is that something that you'd want to do?
I would love to work in that world again if the financial stars aligned and there was a way to do it. Yeah, I think that John Dies at the End could be a really cool Netflix series or something if we could find that visionary executive who was willing to.
Maybe they're listening. I hope
You've
they're
put it
listening.
out into the universe. That seems to be all it takes.
Well, I remember opening night, big crowds at the, where did it play? At the Newark, maybe? Or one of these theaters here in Santa
It
Monica.
was a huge theater. I remember
Yeah,
that.
my friends were coming out of the previous screening, and I'm like, how is it? And he's like, dude, it's Bill and Ted's Naked Lunch. And I'm like, sold. That is a great
Oh, that should be on the
combo.
poster.
great
I want
line.
to see that on the
Yeah,
poster.
yeah.
That would have been great.
Yeah. I know you've talked about this before, and it's sometimes unmade projects are kind of pointless to talk about, but it's more about perspective after talking to you for a while. There was that one period where, I can't remember, was it Roger Avery wrote all these like Phantasm scripts, and there's going to be this grand trilogy and like this giant sci-fi thing. And to me, I can't imagine that version of Phantasm at all. It's like it's so synonymous with you and your work. I mean, how close did we get to really getting a giant, big budget sci-fi trilogy of Phantasm films? And in retrospect, do you feel that it was probably for the best that version of Phantasm didn't happen? Or was it something that you were into because people were riffing it?
I wouldn't say it was the best, because I would have loved to have seen that movie. It came really close. And that was the most frustrating part about it, was that, I had met Roger when he was probably 19 years old, because I was making this wilderness film called Survival Quest, and my producer on that, Roberta Quezada, had worked with a couple of these young filmmakers from the Bay Area on a Dolph Lundgren exercise video. He said, I met these kids, man, they're great,
Dolph Lundgren exercise video.
Yeah, and it was Roger Avery and Quentin Tarantino were working on this.
Oh, great.
And so what was cool is these guys, they lived in the South Bay, and they ran in this little film pack. There were about 10 of them, and they would work on all their own movies, and they would screen them and have movie nights, and they're just really diehard movie nuts, nerds. And well, we weren't nerds; they were cool. But in any case, Roger, one of the young guys, Scott McGill, was my assistant editor on Survival Quest, and so Roger would come over, and the two of them were always writing scripts. So I got to know Roger, before he'd made a movie. And so here he was, I guess, the week after the Academy Awards, and which is the time when people are supposed to say, Roger Avery, you just won the Academy Award for Pulp Fiction. Where are you going? And he's supposed to say Disneyland. He says, no, I'm going to write the epic, end-all, kick-ass Phantasm sequel that's going to wrap it up for Don to direct. And it was pretty great. And so for over about a 3-month period, he wrote it, and it was just this epic story where where there's this plague zone, and Reggie had this armed up battle cuda, and he had to go in there, and the tall man was, this is Roger, he had them, the tall man had taken up under the Great Salt Lake, where the Mormons had buried their dead from all the way back. And so it was like an industrial mortuary they were mining. And this was kind of the
And it's probably true,
setup.
but I love it.
So, in any case, that was the script. And we took it to, everybody wanted to look at it, but...
But it was always intended. I didn't know it was a sequel with you intended to direct.
Yeah, it was like a
I always
part-
heard it as a remake sort of deal.
No, it was a sequel. It
Wow.
was been the sequel after Phantasm 3.
Wow.
Phantasm 3, yeah. But there was no business model for you to make a theatrical movie, 2 theatrical movies, then a direct-to-video movie, and then to come back and make an even bigger theatrical movie, all with the same cast and the same director. It just didn't exactly add up to those people. So they all said no, and the script went on the shelf, and that was the end of that.
Wow.
I can't leave it alone driving any chance. Because the Popcorn King is one of the most just like visionary things I've ever seen created in a book. Like in my brain, whatever that is, and I imagine it lit your brain on fire because it's similar to a lot of the things you've taken risks on, the big, really out there projects.
Oh, it's typical that it's vintage Joe Lansdale. It's wonderful, and he is. It was just a brilliant story, but there's been different iterations of it. They were talking about it for a TV series at one time, a couple different producers, and I mean, a lot of Joe's material is always under option under various forms. And then there was a long period. I don't know if anybody's ever read the Dead in the West book. I was really hooked into wanting to make. I actually had an option on that at one time. But that was in the fallow period when I remember sending it over to, was it New Line? I probably shouldn't say, but I sent it to one of the places and they go, this is just a zombie picture. We're not making a zombie picture. So I had to go through the script and I had to take every time there was like a Z word, I had to change it to creature because they weren't making zombie movies back then. So just to show you how times change.
Wow. Well, I mean, I appreciate all the time you've given us so far, and this has been one of my favorite chats that we've had.
Oh, before we go, can I talk to you about the movie that I'm executive producing?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, because I know
AppleCart,
you had the guest last week,
Bria Grant
for it. Yeah.
Do you remember when I interviewed you for something Phantasm, and you mentioned
and she was
Bria,
at your house,
and I was like, "Oh, she's right here," and you're like, "What?
What's
That's
up with
pretty funny."
I remember that. Yeah, for sure. But
she's good people. She's one of my good friends.
Oh yeah, she's the best, and she's great in the movie. I'm executive producing this film called AppleCart. It's being directed by Brad Baru, who was one of the producers of John Dies at the End. So I'm kind of returning the favor to him, and he's doing a great job. And it's got A.J. Bowen and Barbara Crampton, and she's amazing also. And they just hired Joseph Bashara to do the music.
Oh, he's a friend of ours.
Yeah, he's really brilliant composer. So it's all coming together, and looking forward to getting that one out soon.
Hopefully later this year.
That's the plan. I'm not directing, so I don't know when Brad's going to be finished with his cut, to tell you the truth.
Can I thank you for one thing? Because I've been waiting for you for like 200
I don't want
episodes.
to wrap. We have to talk about Angus. That's the last thing.
I did want to just ask you. I have two images. Something it's a horror term thrown around, kinder trauma, things that disturb you when you were a child. And I have two that like I wouldn't be sitting here with that one. My first was Fluffy from Creepshow, and that just destroyed me. It gave me nightmares for years. But the second one, I didn't know where it came from till about 6 years ago, and I thought it was Dragon Slayer. And I grew up, and so I remember renting Dragon Slayer, going, I must have been Dragon Slayer. And I watched it, and I was really disappointed when it ended, because I was like, there's this creature, and he puts his arms around you, and he has weird skin, and he shakes, and then bones fall out the bottom. And then somebody on Facebook goes, no, you're thinking of Beastmaster. And I went back to Beastmaster, and it was like having a flashback, like a bad acid flashback, because it really terrified me as a kid. Whatever was going on there, what the hell was that thing? I've been waiting to ask you, what the hell was that
Shaky
thing?
skin monster.
What was that? I don't know. It's amazing that it had the impact on you, because it's once again, as the filmmaker, all you're seeing is the flaws and the rubber special effects and all of that stuff. But Eldritch, it does bring back a point, which is that movies will have an impact on you when you're in your youth. And none more than one of the most frightening movies that I ever saw when I was like 9 on the local TV channel, and I think the whole movie's on YouTube right now. It's called The Twonky. By Arch Obler. I don't know if you ever heard about it.
We are all watching it for the
watch it next week.
The Twonky, Twonky.
Interesting.
And it stars Hans Conried of all people.
Wow.
But the idea was that aliens had taken over this television set, and this man is tormented in his house because his TV set is actually an alien. And they have these scenes where the Twonky on the TV stand actually walks and follows him and shoots a laser out of the thing. And I'm telling you, at age 10, but now watch it now.
Well, it's taking the horror into your living room, right? And you're a kid, and the TV's right there. Yeah,
absolutely true. But I will unfortunately tell you that the effects don't hold up when you're a little more mature.
Well, the poster is epic. I'm looking at it right now. It's from 1953.
It's a magical moment. Like, that is that period that we always go back to. But to see something that really messes you up, it's weird as horror fans that's something we then chase. Like we then chase that weird high. So thanks for that.
Well, what I was going to say, what I love too, is that much like Phantasm, where did the creature come from? It's just an instinct for you. It's just from the gut. It's just from whatever primordial fucking thing that's going on in the back of your brain. It's just like you spilled it onto the screen, and you were given that opportunity to do so. Most people don't. So I think that's really cool.
Can I say, when we had David Hartman on several months ago, and he coined the best phrase I'd never heard. But the second he said it, like people like on our boards want to do T-shirts. HBO, hey, Beastmaster's on.
Oh yeah.
It was like because that was an HBO movie that would always be on.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
It played. Who would have known at the time? But. Yeah, David Hartman, boy, did he do a good job on Ravager. I'm in awe. He's got some wonderful stuff on his website called Sideshow Monkey. I don't know if you guys ever go to it.
Super fun.
Amazing artist.
But he's doing these series of The Art of the Monster where he does time-lapse drawings. And for those of us who were very clumsy with pen and ink, man, you can learn how to draw monsters. It's insane what he does. His God-given gifts.
Well, I just wanted to close. One of the things that stands out about the Phantasm franchise is obviously Angus Scrimm and the Tall Man, and you'd worked with him since the very beginning. And all of us in this room have met him at various points. I mean, I met him at 15 years old at a Fango, and then I got to host a panel with you guys. So to me, that was like. Never in a million years could I think as a 15-year-old kid and he was so nice to, I think this is Phantasm 2, where he's promoting it. And, you hear the stories like, Bekah was saying he did the Fangoria commercial.
Yeah, when we shot the Fangoria commercial, he came and did them for us every couple of years. It was like every 5 years, let's bring in Angus to do another round of commercials about subscriptions. And there was something, like we wanted him to do a tagline at the end, and I don't even remember how it was worded, but it was something like, read fucking Fangoria right now. And he wouldn't curse. And I remember being on set and being like, that is so cool that he could just be like, I'm not saying that.
Yeah. But I mean, but such a lovely guy for everyone that met him as a fan. And, I don't know. I was hoping you could maybe share a story. It doesn't matter what it is, but something that stands out to you. People should know that before... Was it before acting when he was the music writer? Because he wrote the liner notes to the first Beatles.
Yes, he did. Well, he had quite a very, he was a very well-educated man. Graduated from USC. His instructor, he used to always tell us, was his first acting teacher was William DeMille, the brother of C.B. DeMille. And Angus had a very vibrant career as a writer. He worked for not only Capitol Records, where he did the first Beatles album, but he had relationships with all kinds of greats, from Sinatra to Miles Davis to Itzhak Perlman. Yeah. In fact, my wife, as a birthday gift, had bought me a copy of a Mae West album that had liner notes, and Angus told me the whole story about going to visit Mae West and writing this thing.
Wow.
But he also wrote for Cinema Magazine, which I think it went under in like 1970s, and it was the guy who ran, I think his name was Jack Hansen, and he had left it to his son. And so Angus was like the associate editor, and the son, Curtis Hansen, who ultimately was the director, was the editor.
Yeah,
and I have a couple old episodes or old issues of that, and they're very, where they really detailed film comment. It's good stuff. But, Angus was a wonderful guy, a close friend of mine for many years. It's a tragic loss to lose him. But I can just say that visiting those conventions with him and watching the response, it was always a mystery to me why people who professed to have been terrified of him, all they wanted to do was to hug him and pinch him and kiss him. And they would drape themselves all over him in the photos. It was like he was a member of their family. I don't know if that had to do with conquering their fears or just because Angus was such a nice guy who would actually, because sometimes if you go to those conventions and you sit there in the autograph, I watch some of the other people doing autographs, and they don't even look at the people. They sign the autograph. And Angus would just spend 5-10 minutes and ask people about their lives, and he would remember the stories. And then if he would meet them later, he would say, "Oh, I met you 4 years ago, and your aunt was the one who whatever." He was just an amazing man. A big loss for us.
That's right. Well, God, I mean, we can't really top that.
Well, Don, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it.
Love your show, and hope you'll invite me back one day.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Maybe when
We might
AppleCart
have to
comes
retire
out.
with this episode, actually. I feel like this is a perfect capstone to our show.
We've been trying for this for so long, guys.
Where do we go from here?
Yeah, we've
Let's
met
not
our
get
goal.
too carried away.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Don. We appreciate it, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you.